Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast, Sunday evening edition, a rarity on these parts. I'm Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. We are just coming off a press conference with Dan Lanning, which was originally scheduled to preview the Holiday Bowl, and we will have a full preview of that at a later time. But there were, no offense to the Holiday Bowl, more important questions that needed to be asked since we've last spoken to Dan Lanning. We have updates on Bo Nix. We have updates on DJ Johnson, what happened after the Oregon State game. We have updates on the offensive coordinator search. We have updates on Kenny Dillingham coaching in the bowl game possible. We also have opt-outs. We have transfer portal talk. There's a lot to get to. It's almost kind of a choose-your-own-adventure podcast here. So I'm going to start with maybe the order of business of how they were asked. So that starts with DJ Johnson. Dan Lanning did not really want to say it for him, but also made it kind of clear that DJ is not playing in the Holiday Bowl. Said that he's going to be preparing for that Senior Bowl that he has accepted an invite to in Mobile, Alabama, preparing for the NFL draft. He also touched on Christian Gonzalez opting out. And I think it was you, Erik, who asked the question that this is going to be an opportunity for some other guys to maybe make their first start of the season, see more playing time in this Holiday Bowl matchup against North Carolina.
Yeah, no, first off, for the DJ thing, I don't know how much we want to get into the weeds with that, but he did also give like kind of somewhat of an explanation of what transpired there. And again, it's so brief and it's all based upon this small video. So I don't even know if I want to get too much into it, but he did say a pretty extreme thing was said to DJ that led to whatever happened that was on that video. And I don't want to say, he was pretty clear he didn't want to diminish what took place there and didn't want to give any kind of opt out for DJ for what took place. And DJ needs to own what took place there, but did kind of offer some information around that part, which I think has still been kind of a question mark for the fans. And then mentioned as Matt said, that he won't, it doesn't sound like he'd be playing in the game. He did leave the door open. And I also asked, is there anyone else that you expect to opt out of this game? The answer was no, and that followed a question that was, what's Bo Nix's status? In which case, I think this is maybe one of the bigger parts of this whole deal. Dan's response about whether Bo would play in the bowl game was, Bo is a competitor. He wants to get out there and play in this bowl game for sure. Kind of short and sweet answer from Dan Lanning on that topic. And this is obviously significant for several reasons. We could do probably 30 minutes reacting to this entire exchange if we wanted to or chose to. Certainly, it sounds like Bo Nix is playing in this game, and I don't know. I just saw Jeff Schwartz's tweet, and I probably agree with it, where he said, this opens up the door. The more probable outcome of the two possibilities here is that this indicates that Bo will be back next year.
I think that's what's happening.
Can't say it for sure. We started hearing some positive chatter, about a week ago? Yep. This indicates that. I mean, he could obviously just be doing one final hurrah, doesn't want to leave the team kind of in a bind, but not exactly commonplace in today's college football. And maybe Bo's just a different guy who wants to do things a different way. But I certainly kind of come away agreeing with Matt, and then what I saw with Jeff Schwartz's tweet, kind of analyzing the information of kind of okay, you got a senior quarterback who does have 1 year of eligibility available to him, who also has a draft, some sort of a draft expectation, at some some point he will have an NFL career. Probably unlikely that player plays in a bowl game, risks injury, delays the process of getting ready for said NFL draft. Especially, and not to diminish the Holiday Bowl, but it's the Holiday Bowl. If there was ever an excuse to not play in a bowl game, it would be this one. And I think it's pretty telling that, at least from what Dan is saying, that Bo is not going to opt out of this game. Noah Sewell doesn't sound like, based upon what Dan said, will not opt out of this game. Same thing with Brandon Dorlus. He did kind of leave the door open for those two players in particular. Well, he wasn't singled out, but for other players, he did say things can change and we'll be ready whenever we step on the field. We'll make sure we have 11 out there ready to compete. So, there of course are contingency plans, but I thought, to me, one of the more positive kind of outcomes of this press conference was the realization that Christian Gonzalez, who announced earlier on Sunday he would be opting out of the bowl game to prepare for the 23 draft, and then DJ Johnson, who Lanning kind of indicated won't be playing in this bowl game most likely, that those are the only two players who are opting out of this game. Obviously, could be other players who transfer, but I think there's been a lot of doom and gloom on the message boards. We've certainly seen people ask, like, who's the quarterback? A lot of people didn't think Bo would play in this game. People asking, is Bucky Irving going to just wildcat for the entire 4 quarters? But I think it's certainly a positive in the short term. But, I think, not to read too much out of it, but we clearly are. I think this speaks to the probability of Bo Nix returning for 23. It certainly seems more likely today than it did even a couple of hours ago.
I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, the players have opted out of much higher bowl games for their NFL draft stock because that's the most important thing to them, and then rightfully so. That's their professional career. But I think out of this press conference, Bo Nix returning for the bowl game is probably the most important news, just because that puts a sense of ease into the Duck community, the fans, because like Erik was mentioning, the radical idea of having Bucky Irving be the Wildcat running back or handing the keys off to former 4-star quarterback Ty Thompson for an entire game just sent chills down Oregon fans' spines. So I think this is a really good development for Oregon. I think Dan kept it pretty brief because I think that's all he really needed to do was to keep it brief. Maybe Nix comes out and just announces it on his own at this point, but probably not. It doesn't seem like he's that type of guy to go out and put out a big old notes app thing of announcing that he's staying for this bowl game and moving on. Yes, Erik.
Well, I was just going to say he didn't fully do that, but he kind of did that.
Yeah, he just kind of had a post, and then the Oregon football account had a post about, are you guys ready to watch Bo Nix again? And so again, that's all Dan needed to say. It was like, yeah, he's going to play. Like, there's a game on the schedule. It's December 28th. He's going to play because that's the type of player that he is. Yeah. But other than DJ Johnson and Christian Gonzalez opting out for obvious reasons, there's still plenty of time for other guys to opt out. I'd be a little surprised if they were the only guys to opt out, obviously, other than people who enter the transfer portal or, starting tomorrow, definitely enter the transfer portal, no longer intending to enter the transfer portal. I just think there's enough time for somebody to go. I don't know who it would be, but that is a really positive sign to begin with because there are plenty of options. Erik went through them who could enter the transfer portal, who would have a significant impact on potentially how Oregon plays on both sides of the ball. Still, all the offensive linemen haven't. Alex Forsyth mentioned that he would be playing in this bowl game on Instagram, I believe. Still waiting on a couple of words from them, but again, I would expect with Dan staying in charge, and I guess this could lead us into a potential offensive coordinator candidacy or a search. I think with what they have on staff right now, I'd be surprised if any of those offensive linemen or any other potential opt-outs on the offense do opt out and don't stick around with the team for the Holiday Bowl.
Let's save the OC search post-break. So we're coordinating this podcast. It's mapping out as we're recording, as we always do. I think we have a better idea of also who's available to play in this game from just a pure roster standpoint, because Dan doesn't anticipate any more opt-outs. So that would be like a Brandon Dorless or maybe a Noah Sewell. He said things could change. We're getting an idea, too, of who's leaving the program. There's been a wide number of guys that have announced their intentions ahead of tomorrow's opening of the portal. There will be more that happen when we're recording this podcast Sunday evening at 6:49 p.m. Pacific time, and probably 8 a.m., 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. There will probably be another one that hits. But there's been a list of guys. Well, off the top of my head, so far today alone, Jackson LeDuc is gone.
There's nine total players.
Yeah. Jackson LeDuc is gone. Brandon Buckner is gone. Terrell Tillman is gone. Braden Swinson is gone. He didn't go today.
I'm missing him.
There's so many I'm missing. All right.
Come on. Lachlan Bruce.
You have it in front of your head.
No, Lachlan Bruce. Who?
Oh yeah, Stockton Bruce, the punter, the walk-on punter. He is gone. We also have Dante Thornton, Seven McGee, Jay Butterfield, Byron Cardwell. But I think none of
Bram Walden.
There we go.
Yeah, Bram Walden. That's another one. That's how many there have been. And
look, that's what it is. That's the end of the list.
And there'll be more. And this isn't just an Oregon thing. So if you're an Oregon fan and you're listening to this podcast or you're watching it on YouTube, hit that like button. But this isn't an Oregon thing. This isn't everything. This is an every school thing. Everyone's going to deal with it. There's going to be more at Oregon. But I think the biggest thing right now, I mean, as we're recording this podcast, a starting offensive lineman for Alabama has entered the portal. As of now, no one on this team that is a starter or is really a key contributor beyond Dante Thornton, who really wasn't a key contributor until Chase Cota got hurt in late October or maybe early November. None of their big guys have left yet. That doesn't mean it can't happen. It certainly could. Between now and tomorrow or on Tuesday. But so far, none of the transfer outs of the program have really been earth-shattering. I think that's a really good sign.
Yeah, and I thought you asked, I believe, the question to Dan about just the portal and kind of how crazy it's going to get. I thought it was interesting. He had kind of an existential moment there where he was kind of looked back and went, years ago when we decided to do this, is this really what we all wanted? I mean, I think, and I just thought that was interesting that he would kind of go, in part because he's been a head coach for 9 months and he wasn't obviously a part of his decision making, but also because I think even a school like Oregon, which we anticipate will benefit from it more than some other schools, and certainly, as Matt said, the 9 players who've chosen to leave the program to this point, very few would have had much of an impact on next year's roster. A lot of the players almost barely played at all over the course of the final 6 weeks of the season. Genuinely, I think Is Thornton the only guy who played more than 25 snaps over the last half of the season that's transferred, that's entered the portal? I think he probably is. Mm-hmm. I mean, if Braden Swinson played more than 25, it's barely. If Jackson LeDuc played, I know Jackson LeDuc played 24 snaps after the first 3 games, so I know he didn't. So, I mean, as Matt said, Oregon hasn't lost a lot of key players, but I think it's interesting a coach like Lanning is kind of wrestling with it because he knows where this is headed, which is it's going to be insanity in less than 24 hours. In about 12 hours, probably. It's going to be crazy starting on the East Coast early morning. It's going to be crazy all day tomorrow. It's going to be crazy throughout the 45-day window, which ends in the middle of January. So as we've kind of established, so far it hasn't hit Oregon in a negative way, from my perspective, really at all. There's going to be a player or two that opts out that surprises, and it's going to be disappointing. And that's just the way this goes. And kind of as Dan sort of sat there and kind of, I think, thought about in the moment and talked through it I think the portal is going to provide a lot of positive things for individuals who aren't getting opportunity to find more opportunity. But the grand scheme of the way it changes the sport, I don't know. We'll see how we feel. It's going to be, from a content perspective, great for duckterritory.com. For an Oregon perspective, I think it's going to end up being more positive than negative. It certainly was a year ago. I think if you wanted to break down the additions Oregon made through the portal versus the players they lost entering this season, I think it's a net positive without question. And I expect the same thing I expect us to be saying something very similar early December next year. Of Oregon ended up losing probably several more players than they did last year when the number was, I think, about 13 or 14. I think they're going to lose close to 20, over the course of the entirety of the portal window. But I think you're going to look back and they'll end up adding some really key players. It just hasn't happened yet. So that's where we ask Oregon fans to be patient and understanding of what this process is. It's not going to be fun to start with because a lot of names that you maybe liked are no longer on the team. But when this process comes to its natural conclusion and the rosters are solidified when you get into, I guess, fall camp in August, I think you'll look up and feel pretty good about how this all played out for Oregon.
Yeah, it's similar to the actual recruiting with high school players where it's the long run. You got to be patient with it. There's going to be guys who flip and flop in a very similar fashion, or a guy like Dante Thornton who heading into the season seemed like he could be, a really big contributing member of this offense. And then their transfer portal addition in Chase Cota, who was thought more of like, hey, that's great depth. That's a great guy with experience in the locker room and specifically a wide receiver room that needs it, turns into one of the best wide receivers on the team. To both Erik and Matt's point, there's going to be a lot of guys. I think there was 14 who entered the transfer portal last year from Oregon, which was down from the national average of 16. I remember doing that article at one point. I don't know what the national average is going to be this year. There's going to be even more movement now. I know we didn't touch on this in Dan Lanning's interview or anything like that, but you get a guy like Deion Sanders who just accepted the position at Colorado. That's going to be even more fuel to the fire for somebody who's maybe unhappy at another school and is like, hey, I could go to Deion and I could be at the Power 5 level. You're no longer going to Jackson State where it's a step below your normal competition. It's going to be mayhem. I'm very excited, even though it might not sound like it. I'm very excited for tomorrow morning just because there's going to be a ton of names in the portal. Like Matt just mentioned at the top, or probably at the top of the show, I don't even remember now. One of Alabama's starting tackles just went to the portal. Like, you don't see that. It's a starting tackle from Alabama. He's going to have every school in the country calling. DJ Uiagalelei entered the portal earlier today. That's something that would be unheard of, 3-4 years ago, of a high-profile player at a high-profile school like Clemson and in the transfer portal. It's going to be fun. It's going to be chaotic. And to both your points, outside of Dante Thornton, who only became a contributor the last 4 games of the season and had nearly half of his yards in one game against Utah, none of these guys were big contributors on either side of the ball. And again, there's still plenty of time for somebody in the 45-day window for somebody who is a big-time contributor to leave. But I think this is a good sign because usually if you are a big-time contributor, you want to get your name out there as early as possible. So every school in the country sees it. You're not just one of the 7,000 kids who joined the portal. You're the biggest news of that day. You're the biggest news of November 29th or December 2nd. That's what these guys like the DJ and the Alabama tackle have done the last couple of days. Those are the big name guys. So I think it bodes well for Oregon in the long run that none of these guys have entered the portal. And I think their philosophy when it comes to getting portal additions is going to benefit them as well. And just a subtle reminder, this is, this past season at Oregon, these, 90% of the kids on the team weren't a Dan Lanning addition. This was a Mario Cristobal built team. Yeah. He's now has, depending on how many people transfer, he now has X amount of positions to go after and get his own guys, him and Tosh Lupoy and whoever is the offensive coordinator. I think it's going to be fun. I think just like Erik said earlier, you look back in August, September, whatever the case, you're going to look at the transfer portal decisions and say, yeah, this was a good idea.
Unofficial count. We'll double check this again later tonight. But unofficial count scholarship players as of right now, 6:58 p.m. Sunday night, December 4th, 74 out of 85 for the Oregon Ducks. That counts everybody, even those that are hurt. Excuse me. That number will continue probably to drop here in a couple days as they get ready for the bowl game. That's kind of the biggest question now is ahead of the bowl is just, how many scholarship players will they have available? We don't know that answer yet. It'll dwindle a little bit. They'll be adding some players to the portal. Obviously, they won't play in the game, but that's going to be the hot stove that we'll be tracking here for the next 45 days, plus, high school and JUCO recruiting as well. But let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's dive into the OC search because there's a lot to unpack there as well from Dan. I think it deserves its own standalone section here. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. OC search, Kenny Dillingham off to ASU. Dan never actually answered my question about would he come back to coach in the bowl game, but made it very clear he was not. Dillingham will not be here. He will be running ASU's program moving forward. He's no longer an Oregon Duck. Mentioned that Drew Maringer, Carlos Lachlan, Adrian Clem, and Jordan Somerville and Junior Adams collectively are going to work together on the offensive side of the football. If you're uncertain who Jordan Somerville is, he is an analyst that worked at Oregon this season. He came from New Mexico. He was a position coach at that school previously and took an analyst role to work under Kenny Dillingham. He worked exclusively all year at quarterback. He will be serving as the quarterback's coach. OC for the bowl game, we really didn't get an idea yet. And
well, he did kind of.
Yeah, he mentioned Junior Adams and Drew Maringer. Seemed like they were going to be putting their brains together and calling this next game.
So is it Junior Maringer?
Drew Maringer is going to be calling this game.
Drew Adams or Junior Maringer. Drew Adams is I like Drew. I don't know. They're both good options. So go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I was just going to play off of which name we should use for our combined for the co-offensive coordinators. It was kind of interesting the way he discussed the internal candidates in this OC search in the long term. I don't know, like it kind of seemed like maybe they're giving more thought to promoting somebody than I expected. But then he also didn't even pick one of the two guys to officially call plays in the bowl game. So like I don't know, I just found that to be sort of interesting. There's a lot of more things that were pretty interesting that Dan had to say about the OC search, but I did find it interesting that he almost, I don't want to say he overlooked external candidates because that certainly wasn't the case. Talked about there being some really exciting people outside the program that were being considered, but he also made the point of, and maybe just to appease these guys who are currently on staff and who are obviously interested in this job, and maybe that's why he chose to at least highlight the fact that there are internal candidates of interest. With clearly, I think Adams and Maringer would be the two that would make sense with their histories having called plays at other schools before. So kind of interesting though that they haven't landed on which guy will officially do it, and if this goes all the way through, like is this going to be a who are the two coaches for the Patriots that opening this season were co-offensive coordinating? Is it like Matt Patricia?
Joe Judge and Matt Patricia. Don't get me started on those two.
Okay, so clearly that doesn't work
No.
according to Jared. So the co-OC thing, kick it off the books, Dan. Pick one. I just thought that was kind of interesting. So yeah, we don't have full clarity on who the play caller is, but it appears that there are two people that will be primarily calling the plays, and will be calling the plays using basically the offense that is in place. Like not like either of them are going to be elevated and then just completely rewriting kind of the game plan and the offense and installing a bunch of crazy stuff. He made it clear like for this bowl game, it is going to be kind of a continuation of what we saw with Kenny previously.
The nice thing is that Bo Nix, now that he's playing, has such a great understanding of this offense that he might just be the guy who's calling the shots regardless. He might just be audibling or setting into the next play. And I think that's a huge asset for this situation for Oregon, at least as an offense. I kind of took the Dan's comments on the offensive coordinator, the internal. I took it the other way. I just thought that was just like he was basically reading from a script. It's like, yeah, these guys are great.
Right.
They're the guys that we hired to do other positions, and I don't want to make them upset, but we're probably going to go external, which is what I hope happens. Both Maringer and Adams have had prior offensive coordinator experience, most notably Junior Adams, very successful offensive coordinating season at Washington last season. Very good. But I think Oregon's offense is going to be just fine for this bowl game. I think now that they have Nix and you don't have to worry about Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington running the dual Wildcat or Ty Thompson playing a full game, I think it'll be just fine. I think both Adams and Maringer, I don't want to disparage them with my Junior Adams comment about his Washington season last season, but those guys are both knowledgeable. They're both good coaches. I think offense wise, it'll be just fine. I think I was more interested with how Lanning addressed the offensive coordinator position hunt that's going. Didn't really give a good answer on when it's going to happen. He said sometime between now and when it happens. So that is your timeline, listeners, now and when it happens. So could be
I think
10 minutes.
I think he's going to deliver on that promise. I think it will be in that timeline. I feel pretty confident.
I do too. I'm very confident in Dan and his ability to deliver on something that has an eternal long lifespan. But overall, he kind of danced around like some of the characteristics on what he was looking for. I think that the best thing he said was that it sounds like they have an unlimited amount of resources to go get somebody who they truly believe deserves it. And that's kind of what he said. And then doesn't matter where the guy coached beforehand, where he is now, as long as he feels that he's fit for the position, that's someone that they want to bring on to the staff. So again, I have some confidence here in Dan and trying to figure out what this offensive coordinator is going to look like.
Oh, you're muted.
Matt, you're on mute.
There we go. He was not on our hot board, but we do know Joe Brady smoke was all around the last, 24, 48 hours. Bruce Feldman tweeted out this morning that was not happening. I think he even got a quote from Brady. I think it was, if I remember correctly. And then tonight,
the quote, Matt, was exactly what you said. Not happening. That's the exact quote. It was.
And then tonight, Dan was asked about just how does he manage a fan base that has expectations with. He was never specifically mentioned, but it was clearly he was talking about Joe Brady being linked to this job and then not happening, being the quote that came from Joe Brady about it. And I thought he gave a really good answer that was like a definite flex by Lanning, where it was, look, he doesn't care about those people that are going to be disappointed in a potential hire. And then he also said that there were people that were disappointed last year with some of the hires that they made. And I think you could instantly go to Carlos Loughlin. When he was hired, everyone was kind of like, wait, what? Like, who is this guy? He's never really coached before. And then Lanning tonight said, go look at, who people were disappointed in or uncertain of last cycle when he made coaching hires. And then he pointed out, worked out pretty damn well for Oregon staff. He doesn't care what logo they wear, what team they coach, what league they're in. He said they'll know it's a good coach. Players will know it's a good coach. And that's basically all that really matters. I thought that was a really good answer to maybe temper some disappointment that Joe Brady isn't coming when he was never coming here in the first place.
Well, Matt, you were linked to the reason he was coming because you follow him on Twitter. Did you see that? I saw several people recognizing that point was part of the reason they thought Joe Brady was coming here because of your Twitter follow. I'm not kidding.
I did not realize a follow on Twitter moved that much momentum.
Does. Well, that goes back to Kevin Wade's, what was it? Follow the follows. Wasn't that his?
Yes.
That was his catchphrase basically.
I was just following the follows.
We're just out here following anybody. Apparently, don't look who.
He wasn't on our hot board. I'll tell you that. He wasn't on our hot board. I didn't think it was gonna happen, and then all of a sudden the smoke started coming out. And it's like, well, maybe I should follow him just in case something does happen.
Yeah. No.
Maybe I'll go follow Nick Saban next.
Yeah. Go follow Nick Saban next to Oregon offensive coordinator because you got to follow the follows. A lot of people could be the next offensive coordinator. About I think 3,000 people Matt follows are likely candidates. That's the candidates pool.
That includes you and I, Eric.
Yeah, I know. I was just gonna say. I know I won't be taking
the job.
I don't. I'll
take it.
Jared will take it.
Yeah,
All right, I'll let you have it, and then I can be very critical of your work from this podcast.
That's good. I'll be getting paid a lot, so I'll take the criticism.
Getting paid a little bit of a pay increase for any of us if we got that job. But not to get. I think there is clearly a level of urgency to get a hire made, right? Like I think we talked about on our podcast. I want to say it was maybe Monday of this week about how it was important to get it kind of done within a week, 10 days to get yourself set up before signing day. And I'm not saying that they won't. This could be done tomorrow, but Dan certainly didn't tip his hand and certainly didn't indicate like a hire is imminent, it's happening right now. Like that wasn't anything that was said. And as Jared did say, Dan delivered kind of a winning retort to my question asking about like what is an appropriate expectation for a timeline, which is basically don't have one. It'll happen when it happens. And I think that's totally understandable. I also share confidence that this will be a positive hire. I don't have a whole lot else to say because nothing Dan really said tonight tips the hand one way or the other. They're considering internal candidates. There's a lot of external candidates. They're going to, find the best person for this job. And kind of the update is there's not a significant update is sort of where I'm at in terms of the actual this is about to happen and it's X.
Yeah, I don't think any of us expected him to be like, "Hey guys, this guy, this dude, here's
sitting next to him in the room too. Hey, yeah. So you'll see next to me, Mr. Joe Brady."
Yeah. I don't think any of us expected that, but it did come across my brain that he might just announce it right then and there, which would have been pandemonium. But
it would have been terrible.
Yeah, it would have been awful. But yeah, it'll happen. It's going to happen eventually. He kind of danced around the question of, I think it was yours where you asked, like before the transfer portal, like getting this guy into the room. Kind of danced around that as well. But again, like we said on Monday, I think again it's really imperative that he at least had somebody that he felt good about Oregon's potential of landing him as he visited Dante Moore and as they head into the transfer portal season. I think it's already a little longer than I expected. I expected them to hire somebody this week, but I think it'll come maybe in the upcoming days, at least between now and when it happens. That's for sure.
We'll wrap it up there. Oregon practiced last week. They had a practice, Dan Lanning said. They'll have a couple practices this week. Bowl prep will really start right around Christmas time. They're going through finals right now. So our actual discussion of this bowl game against the North Carolina Tar Heels will start trickling in here and there on the podcast, but a real deep dive. Like it's just unfair to ask Dan a bunch of questions about him right now because he's out recruiting. He's making an in-home visit. He said later tonight, I think there's a lot to do and they just haven't had time, and we want to be able to provide more context than, we respect the program, respect what they do. We know they're going to play us tough type jargon that we get from coaches all the time. So,
and Matt, plus if we were to ask like 4 questions on Sam Howell, I think people on this podcast and Oregon fans would be livid at us for being like, yeah, we asked about Sam Howell rather than if Bo Nix is playing in the bowl game. Like,
I'd be livid if you asked about Sam Howell too.
He was on my list, but he was number 8 on my list of questions to get around to. So I didn't get that.
Should have asked about Drake May. I think that would have been a better option.
Yes, you're
Sam Howell is
no longer the quarterback at North Carolina.
No,
that would have been
I would have been upset about that.
Yeah, Drake May, brother of Luke May, former
time Luke,
North Carolina Hooper. So yeah, it'll be the Ducks against the Tar Heels. We'll have more of that later on down the road. All 3 of us will be there. I think Erik and I are going to spend Christmas together. So what do you want for Christmas? Give me your list before we go, so I can bring it for you.
I am low on boxer briefs, Matt. So, that and maybe a pair of socks. I'll take a steak dinner. I mean, we are going to be
salt of the earth. Salt of the earth. Right there.
I was going to say, when did you become the ultimate dad? I mean, that's like the dad list right there. Just give me.
Well,
socks,
I didn't think you were going to buy me
whiskey.
You're going to buy me an Xbox, so I didn't think you were going to ask for something that's attainable, and you might actually get it. I don't know.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Austin. Oh, Jared, send me yours too. I know you're not going to be there for Christmas, but send me yours too. It'd be wrong.
All right, we can do that.
All right.
I'm not buying either of you anything.
Fine. See how it is, Erik.
Yeah, you're just in the spirit here. What an asshole. All right. This is all gone off the rails. We're going to get off. Transfer portal will be back tomorrow. It goes live. Monday night, we'll do another podcast discussing all that's come from the first day of transfer portal. But until then, you've been listening to the Austin Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.